We feel blessed to have Keith Jones with us for a few days to preach the gospel regarding the 7 churches of Asia. We present these to you in audio-only format. Please like and share them and subscribe to our channel so that you'll be notified of our newest content. And now, on to the sermon.
So thank you very much again for your attendance this morning, for being here for Bible class. And I'll take you again to Revelation, the 2nd chapter, and we're going to talk about the church at Smyrna. The wonderful thing about Smyrna is that it is a church that has no reproof. Remember, we said there are going to be 2 of these that the Lord didn't get on to about anything, and Smyrna is one of them. Philadelphia is going to be the other, but Smyrna for sure is going to be one. And they were therefore a very faithful congregation. If you look at Ephesus, you go down the road about 35 miles north, and there is Izmir today, which is Smyrna. And it likewise, as all of these churches are, in Turkey, which is a Muslim country. They allow, because I suppose they make good money off of it, I don't know, but they allow people to go there who are Christians. And even in one of the cities, they have allowed there to be a big monument with the entire letter to that church posted on it, which is rare for a Muslim country. But Smyrna is really, really a neat place when you look at the things that they were going through. Unfortunately, they were hit very, very hard by the things that were going on that day and time in Rome. Not only that, Smyrna was a place that today is kind of prosperous. We're going to show you some things in just a moment. But it was also known for a very famous event, and that is the death of one of what is called the church fathers. We have to be a little careful when we say the church fathers. I have studied the Orthodox Church over the last year, and as I mentioned, was able to go to Greece and to Corinth and to much of this area, and sat down and studied with a scholar for a day, and then for about 2 hours with one of their priests, and then a monk. The monk was a little different, and I'll talk to you about him as we go along. But it was a very interesting discussion. And so this land and what backs it up and what's going on here at Patmos is of utmost interest to me. But we don't see the same attitudes when it goes over into Turkey. We see, again, a Muslim nation. Although bustling, the city will be at Smyrna, we see this great conflict that even now has some animosity among the Turks and the Greeks. And so we want to begin in Revelation, the 2nd chapter, in verse 8, and read through verse 11. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, These things saith the first and the last, who was dead, and lived again. I know thy tribulation and thy poverty, but thou art rich, and the blasphemy of them that say they are Jews, and they are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Fear not the things which thou art about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried, and you shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches, and he that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death. When we look at the background of these churches, I think it helps us to understand what these letters mean. If you were to go to Smyrna today, this is what you would find. Again, a very beautiful small place and very modern. It wasn't that day and time exactly like this, certainly. That day and time, it was a place of massive idolatry. The agora is the marketplace in Smyrna, and there again, especially in Smyrna, you had to prove that you had pinched the pinch of the incense and recognized Caesar as Almighty, as Lord of Lords, King of Kings, some of the very same things that the Savior says about himself. Some of the very words that they required you to say. Would you do that? We say we would not. If you knew that you were going to lose everything you've ever worked for, you had, would you? If you knew that you were going to lose your job, would you do that? If you knew that if you didn't, you were going to lose your job, lose your trade, maybe your family would have to live in dearth conditions. We say we wouldn't, but I'm sure, unfortunately, that probably several of the Christians might have done that. But in all of this horrible, horrible condition of what we see here at Smyrna, these people did not. These people did not. Smyrna was a beautiful seaport. It was destroyed in 600 BC. In fact, it was destroyed several times. But Alexander the Great, in about 300 BC, came along and he had a dream, supposedly, that he should rebuild Smyrna. He saw the ruins of it. It was just a small town. And Alexander the Great rebuilt it into a bustling, tremendous city. They had one favorite export, and they had in Smyrna the license for this one thing. And it's even in their name, Smyrna, and that was myrrh. You've heard of myrrh, frankincense and myrrh, for instance. When Jesus died and Nicodemus came to him to embalm his body, what they did that day and time was to take the body of a person and they would put them in the tombs and they would lay them on a catafalque, a table. And there they would remain for a long time. And when they rotted and finally the bones were left, they would put them in a box called an ossuary. And they would take that ossuary and they would put it into the tomb, into a hole in the side called a loculi. And that's the way they buried their dead. In preparation for that, they would take certain items, certain perfumeries, and they would wrap the body in that. And the Bible says that Nicodemus brought 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes to wrap Jesus' body in when they were preparing him for ultimate deterioration. Do you remember the New Testament says that they buried Jesus in a tomb where no man had ever laid? Bear in mind that their tombs, several would lie in those tombs, but nobody had ever laid in there. Nobody was buried there. And so we see this frankincense, and we see the myrrh, and we see the aloe used just about everywhere. And the Egyptians took great pride in their embalming process. I read years ago the things that they were doing in Egypt, and they, depending on your status or depending on how much you could afford, they had embalmers. It was one of the big trades in Egypt. Big trades in Egypt. But they would embalm you this way, or you would get the finest and the finest funeral, depending on how much money you had and how much you paid the embalmer. And they did that because they were preserving your body in order to get into heaven, or their version of an afterlife. And so it was very important to them. Very important to them. But here in Smyrna, they had the license, the worldwide license, to produce that. But not only that, they were a town, a place that had seemed like it came back from the dead, because it was dead when Alexander the Great went there. And now it's alive. It's alive. And so the things at Smyrna were revivals of life and revivals of the body. And when you talk about their gods and their ceremonies, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. Unfortunately, if you did not bow down to these idols, you were an outcast. And certainly, if you didn't bow down to the Flavian dynasty, you were considered not only an outcast, but an outlaw. You could not participate in many things, and you may very well have been put to death. And that's what these Christians were going through that day and time. There was one of the famous quote-unquote church fathers A little bit ago, I told you that I studied Orthodox religion because it fascinated me what they believed in, their similarities to us. And as I was speaking to one of their priests, I was telling him about our religious organization. He said, "That's amazing to me." And I said, "Why so?" He said, "Because we just had a conference and one of our priests had been over to the States and he came back and told us about you guys and the similarities in what we believe. You would not feel at home in their worship service. Although the elements are there, they're in a different language." And not only that, their music is chanting. And that's kind of strange. You know, I don't know if you've noticed it, but in our songs, and I'm not a musician at all, know nothing about songs, but our ending note is the same as the beginning note. Have you ever noticed that? And so you can just start back at the beginning with the note you left off on. And that's not always, but most of the time. Theirs doesn't. And that's disconcerting to a lot of us when we hear that and start somewhere else. And what's going on here is the question. But what interested me was why people today are going back to the Orthodox Church. There's no such thing as Greek Orthodox. It's Orthodox. It's the largest church and the only authorized church in Russia. It's the Russian Orthodox Church. They call it the Greek or the Russian or the American or wherever. It's just the Orthodox Church. And there's one division of it, an Oriental Orthodox, that believes in a few things that are different. And certain people today are going back to it. I have a friend that was a Baptist, very strong Baptist fellow, and he said, "I'm going to the Greek Orthodox now, or the Orthodox Church of America." I said, "Why? Why?" He said, "Because we can trace our lineage all the way back as far as it can go. And even the Catholics that we come out of," and they did, they divided over certain doctrinal issues that you and I would divide from the Catholics over. Because we even came out of that, and we have this church that we can trace our lineage back. I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to that say, "I can trace my lineage all the way back to the early apostles." And they believe that they can. The apostolic tradition. I'll try to show you a picture of the church at Corinth. Now, the Orthodox Church at Corinth, they believe is the continuation. They have a poster on the outside as you come into it on the left side. I'll show the picture of it. And I said, "This is amazing. Let me get a picture of this." And he said, "Yeah, why?" And I said, "Yes, let me get a picture and I'll tell you." And it was all Greek. It was the apostolic succession of the church at Corinth. I said, "Is the first name up there on that? I can't read it. But is it Paul?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Is the second name Apollos?" And he said, "Yes, yes." And they went down through about 80 of what they considered their bishops there in the apostolic. And my friend that went back to them, and I said, "You've got to be concerned about that, because the Apostle Paul, writing to the early church, told them that grievous woes would come in. And not only that the church would fall away. There would be this falling away." I said, "Have you thought about that? Maybe you're the falling away church." And he looked at me and he said, "I'm going to go ask my priest about that. And I'm going to get back with you." I said, "All right." He said, "Where is that?" And I showed him. We looked at the passage, talked about it a little bit. I've seen him 4 times since then, not once has he brought up what his priest's response was to that. You cannot trace your lineage back. Nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. As old as the church is, nobody can do that. And so when we talk about these early church fathers, and we're going to talk about one in just a moment with Pergamum, I got to watch the time, but there's a bell this time. When we talk about these early church fathers, we have to be very careful, because it didn't take very long for the church to start doing some awfully weird things. And we can't vouch for a lot of them, but we can vouch for at least this man's death because others wrote about it. And so we find even in Smyrna today all of these places and all of the things that you could certainly go visit. The Temple of Athena. We see that Athens is named after Athena, the Parthenon. If you've not been there, it's just an absolutely tremendous place. You can go to Nashville, and that upper right corner is the one in Nashville, and here's a statue of Athena at the replica in Nashville. There's nothing in the Parthenon today. She's a virgin goddess, and that's what Parthenon had to do with. Parthenon was virgin. But in every one of these places here, we find these inscriptions to Caesar and Caesar worship. And Trajan was the Roman emperor from 98 to 117. right after these things are written, certainly about which John would write, the things that would shortly come to pass. And he allowed the persecution of Christians. And if you look at some of the carvings that they have and in their monuments, you'll say that they are referring to these men as gods. They are certainly, they take on that role. Again, Domitian, the prior Caesars didn't seem to make it important to them. But by the time you get to Domitian, he made it very important to him that you worship him as God, and he's the one that's causing the havoc. And so in Smyrna, you have a prosperous port city in the Aegean Sea. We'll talk about the Aegean Sea some more as we go along. It was a great center of Caesar worship. Once a year, they were required to burn a pinch of incense to Lord Caesar and say that with their mouth, or they would be branded disloyal. You were kicked out of everything you could possibly imagine. The Lord does not pronounce any condemnation of Smyrna. The church, though, would not be free of troubles. The Apostle Paul was told when he went to Corinth, and he said, I was with you in much fear and trembling. But the Lord told him, he said, nobody's going to lay a hand on you. And yet in Acts 18, he stands trial while Jews bring him before Gamaliel. We'll talk about in one of our lessons as well. So bad things happen, even though the Lord was complimented them, not talking about anything that they were doing wrong, praises them only. That doesn't mean that they're not going to have trials. And it didn't mean that the Apostle Paul and others were not going to have trials as well in the things that they go through. So in Revelation, the 2nd chapter, armed with that in mind, I want you to think about some of these things then. And of the angel of the church at Smyrna, these things saith the first and the last. Now that's, again, is drawn from Revelation 1, the beginning and the end. If somebody asked you, what's the difference between God and man? What's the difference between God and everything else? There's a very simple answer to that. And that is that God has always been, always will be, was not created. And so everything else was. You and I were created. Angels were created. Everything we see here today was created. The wind, even the things that we don't see, were created. But there is one big distinction between God and everything else. And that is that God was not created. He's the creator. And so he's described as the first and the last, who was dead and lived again. Now I want you to think about this city, who's considered the city of regeneration. The city whose even product is about regeneration and going to a better place. Myrrh, who was dead and was rebuilt. And Jesus draws in every one of these churches, every one of them, upon the circumstances that existed then. I know thy tribulation and thy poverty, but thou art rich. These people were losing their livelihood, losing their wealth, losing their possessions because of their faithfulness to God. And that's sad. That's horrible. You and I are thankful to be in such a situation as we are today. And the blasphemy of them that are say they are Jews, and they are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Synagogues are interesting to me. Do you know how many times they're found in the Old Testament? The word is found one time. There were 400 years between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was 400 years of prophetic silence. Tremendous things happen. You end up with one national ruler, and you start with another by the time you get to Christ, the Romans. The Pharisees, not mentioned in the Old Testament, all appeared in the 400 years. Sadducees, Essenes, all of those happened in the 400-year period in between the Old and New Testament. The synagogues, after Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, we see by the time we get the New Testament, synagogues in a lot of places. You know, the synagogues were controlled by typically the party of the Pharisees, but the temple was controlled by the party of the Sadducees. And these people believed different things. Same God, but different things. They're kind of like Republicans and Democrats, they totally differ in their perspective. I don't know where you are, it's none of my business. But they do accept one another as being the powers that are, for the most part. And they did too. And here are these synagogues. But he says, they're supposed to be worshiping God in that synagogue over there. These Jews are. They say they're a synagogue, but they're a synagogue of Satan. And there's a reason for that. Fear not the things which thou art about to suffer. By the way, he said they blasphemed. And the blasphemy of them that say they're Jews, they blasphemed. They spoke evil against Christians. Blasphemed certainly God, but spoke evil against Christians, it appears. You see, in Rome, in the society of Rome, they had something called religio licita. And they had something called religio illicita. Religio licita means that we are going to approve all of these religions. Religio illicita means we're not going to approve these religions. And they outlawed, Rome did, any new religion. They outlawed. And so what happened was when the Christians came along and the Jews got mad at them, they would put them on trial. And when they did, do you know what they would say? These men are teaching things that are illegal, that are unlawful. And do you know what the magistrates would say? The rulers would say, no, they're not. This is just a branch off the old Jewish religion. It's religio licita. We'll talk more about that as we come along. But it was hurting the Jews. Many of their members, I'm sure, they would lose. And they blasphemed. And he said, fear not the things which thou art about to suffer. They had some bad things about to happen to them. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried, and you shall have tribulation 10 days. When we talk about numbers in the book of Revelation, we talk about 7 being the perfect number. That's the perfect number, the complete number, the whole number for divinity. But when you come to humanity, for us, the perfect number is 10. And I believe that what he's talking about here, although I may be wrong, which is seldom, by the way, the 10, they're going to lose their life. You're going to be destroyed by this. Listen to the next thing he said. He said, some of you are going to be cast into prison. How long? Fear not, about to suffer. Behold, the devil's about to cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried, and you shall have tribulation 10 days. And then he says, the very next thing, be faithful unto death. They would lose their life. And that happened. And they did lose their life. The required worship of Caesar was simple. Annually, each person must, in the presence of officially designated witnesses, take a pinch of incense and burn it, saying with their mouth, Caesar's Lord. And with these few words, said the officials would give them a certificate, good for a year. And you could do whatever you wanted to for a year, but you had to do that yearly. Polycarp, and again, I preface this by saying, considered one of the church fathers. There are a lot of people who wrote what happened to Polycarp. There's, I think, no question as to what happened to Polycarp. He is a very famous martyr. And he was an old man. He was 86 or 87. And now they were declared illegal because he would not bow to Caesar. He would not claim Caesar was God. And so now, in his older age, they sent Roman soldiers out to pick him up. He invited them in, said, come on in. I know where I'm going. You're going to take me off to kill me. I know where I'm going, but why don't you guys come in and have something to eat and let me go pray to my God for 1 hour. And they ate, and the soldier said, well, why are we picking this man up? He's an older man. He can't hurt anything, and he's nice. All he's going to do is just go pray. He prayed for 2 hours. They took him away. They put him on a stake. They burned him. Those who watched this, that have written about it, that were there, and there were several, said that those Jews of the synagogue, because they couldn't find enough wood, delighted in finding wood for the fire. Delighted in it. They said, please deny your God. And he made that famous statement, 80 and 6 years have I served Christ. I guess he was 86. Nor has he ever done me any harm. How then could I blaspheme my King who saved me? I bless thee for deigning me worthy of this day and this hour, that I may be among thy martyrs and drink the cup of my Lord Jesus Christ. The fire blew and didn't kill him, and they stabbed him and killed him. It happened the way Jesus said it would happen. It happened. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life. On their coins in Smyrna, they had a crown. A crown was given to winners. A crown was given to the priest when they took care of their annual feast. They were given a crown. Christians didn't have a crown. And the Lord said, you be faithful unto death, and I'm going to give you that crown. I'm going to give you that victory crown, the Stephanos. And then in verse 12, we began Pergamum. Pergamum had a great zip code. If you wanted to be anybody, you wanted to go to Pergamum. You go to Pergamum by going a little bit further down. And you, from Smyrna, you go down this way about 40 miles because that's where the road was. And then you took a right for 10 miles, and there you come to Pergamum. Pergamum was a very famous city. Let's read the letter Pergamum in verse 12. The angel of the church in Pergamum write, these things saith he that hath the sharp two-edged sword. I know where thou dwellest, even where Satan's throne is, and thou holdest fast my name, didst not deny my faith, even the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you where Satan dwelleth. We do not know who Antipas was exactly. Some people say, well, they think he was one of the, certainly are the early church members there. Someone said he was one of the elders there. We don't know, but the Lord called him out as saying, my witness, he's a martyr. They killed him where Satan dwells. He knows where Satan's throne is. In verse 14, but I have a few things against thee. They were losing their life, but he said, I got some things against thee. Because there have some that hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit fornication. So hast thou also some that hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans in like manner. Repent therefore, or else I come to thee quickly, and I will make war against them with the sword of my mouth. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches. To him that overcometh, to him will I give the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone, and upon the stone a new name written, which none knoweth, but he that receiveth it. Pergamum was a town where you could choose your own idol, if you would like. And it is full of temples, many of them. It was corrupt, but people came there for all sorts of reasons. One of them is this gentleman right here, if you can read in it, Asclepius, and you know him, you just don't know you do. They had a hospital there at Pergamum, and the hospital is very famous. And it was a hospital of snakes, one of the ways they healed you. So you went to the hospital, you laid out overnight, you slept. I see some cringing, a little uncomfortable here. I know, me too. It's that season too, you know. Be careful. They don't call those copperheads mean for a reason. For no reason. They are mean. But, a snake, when it bites you, doesn't have to envenomate you. It can bite you and let you go. But they choose to envenomate you just about every time they do, And what they would do, these were tame snakes, but they'd lay you out overnight, and they would take these snakes, and they would crawl all over you. And that would heal you of what malady you had. That was just part of it. They had other more conventional treatments, but that was one of the things that they came. And so when you see this God, Asclepius, you will see a rod with a snake on it. Now you recognize that because every time you see an ambulance come by, that's where they got that from. Not exactly where they got the doctors from. That was from caduceus. But when it comes to the EMS service, yes, it's adopted. And that came from right here. And that was extremely, extremely offensive to Christians. They knew the old story. They knew the story of how that when they were bitten by serpents in the wilderness because of their sin, they put that on a stake and healed them. And they knew that this was Satan at work here. And so you had not only that, but an acropolis, certainly. Acropolis, if you think of the word acro, every time you hear acro, acrophobia, scared of heights, right? Anything with acro means high. And so you'll have the Corinthian Acropolis. You'll have the Athenian Acropolis. And you'll have these hillsides, the Pergamum Acropolis. And so this was a tremendous place. We only have about 5 minutes, and I want to turn back to our text for just a moment. But when we go back to Pergamum, 2 or 3 things. We said we don't know exactly who Antipas was, but we know that he was killed. We know that the Lord knows where Satan dwells, that the Lord knows what's going on here. He said, I have a few things against you, and he brings up these Nicolaitans. And now we find out a little bit more about the Nicolaitans. People have said, well, they're part of Nicholas, who was one of the early deacons from the early book of Acts. We don't know that. We don't know. But we do know what we read here, and that is these Nicolaitans were like Balaam and Balak. Balak wanted Balaam to prophesy against the people. He saw them coming toward him, 2 million people strong coming toward him over in the Moabite area, just north of the Edomites. And he hired Balaam, Balak did, to prophesy against them. And God wouldn't let him do that. And so he figured out a way. Here's how we're going to do it. So he counseled with Balak. He said, if you'll put some women out there, those men will have a relationship with them. And not only that, they love to worship idols. And you do those 2 things. And you got them. And he did. And many of them lost their life. And he said, you know, you're putting up with these Nicolaitans. And obviously the Nicolaitans, he said, in fact, he used that in verse 15. He says, in like manner, are like Balaam and Balak. They're doing the same thing. They're telling you it's okay to engage yourself in the worship of these temples. That part of it was the sexual things that they did. It's okay to go into these temples and eat. That's where you have your parties, after all. Your birthday parties are there. Your graduation party. All these things are happening in the temple. It's a social place, you know. That's okay, because it doesn't matter what we do in the body. It's separate. It's kind of like a Gnostic idea. So it's okay. He said, no, it's not okay. Ephesus didn't put up with it, but he said, you people are putting up with it. Repent, therefore, in verse 16, or else I'll come to thee quickly, and I will make war against them with the sword of my mouth. If you have an ear, listen to him. He said, I'm going to give you manna from heaven. And I'm going to give you a white stone. When they invited people that day and time, we don't know exactly the idea of the white stone. We do know that some people carried a white stone around with them in their pocket with the name of their God on it for good luck. Kind of like people wear St. Christopher medals today. We see that also when you were invited to one of the major functions, they took marble and a white placard marble and they put your name on it. And that's your invitation. When you got there, you showed them the marble invitation. We don't know if that's part of this. Probably something they know, we don't know, but we don't even know that. But the Lord said, you go through all this, and I'm going to give you hidden manna. I'm going to sustain you, and I'm going to give you a white stone. And upon the stone, a new name written. And do you know what that new name is? Good answer, because nobody does. And he goes on and says, that's which no one knoweth, but he that receiveth. God will take care of you. I feel like a Mickey Mouse when it comes to the faithfulness of these people. I hope we never have to go through anything like this. And if we do, I hope we would be as faithful to them. But I can tell you, there are many times in my life I haven't been. How about you? You been perfect in your life? Raise your hand. If that's you, I appreciate what Job said, that man that is born of woman is but few days and full of trouble. And that has been my experience in life. How about you? Thank you for listening.